Welcome to Lyric Lab Poetry. My name is Martin Jago, and in this video we are exploring the Pantoum. This is a form I've mentioned previously in the video on the villanelle, and I'll put a link to that video at the end of this one. And in that video, I said I felt that in some way the Pantoum was related to the villanelle. In fact, they're not related at all. They're from different centuries and they are from different continents. So what on earth did I mean? Well, if you were to put the two forms side by side, you would completely see what I'm talking about. And it's to do with the repeated lines within each of those forms that give the poem a kind of an echo of itself as it progresses. They are, of course, quite distinct from one another. And I think for any schoolboy growing up in England in the 1980s, they would be familiar with the poem Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night by Dylan Thomas. They might even be familiar with poems like One Art by Elizabeth Bishop or Lonely Hearts by Wendy Cope. And those three poems alone would give the student reader everything they needed to have a sort of understanding of how the villanelle works and what the villanelle is, even if they weren't aware that that was the name of this received form. The Dylan Thomas poem I mentioned, Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night, everyone knew that. It was something they would have heard on the radio, on the TV, and probably studied in English class. So we were furnished with good examples of that form. We were never furnished with any examples of what the Pantoum is or can do, and I think that speaks to a kind of Western centricity in education at the time, and to colonial structures within education and sort of notions of Western, sort of implicitly, notions of Western exceptionalism, because I grew up knowing what the villanelle was and assuming that the Pantoum, which I'd heard of just sort of peripherally, was a kind of distant and poor relative of the villanelle. And I labored under that misapprehension for many years, until one day, happily, I think sometime between 2023 and 2024, when I was facilitating the public poetry workshop on a Saturday morning in the Los Angeles Public Library in downtown LA, when one of our regular participants came in and shared a poem that was also a Pantoum. And they read the poem out loud, and everyone stopped and sort of looked and said, well, that's a really good poem. And what was that thing it was doing with those lines that repeat throughout the poem? Oh, it's a Pantoum, they said. And so everyone went away from that session thinking and wondering, well, maybe I could write a Pantoum. And it was a bit like sonnet fever in the 1500s when everyone was penning sonnets to their lovers. I think everyone became a little in love with the Pantoum, and it's a really fascinating form. So let me just grab my laptop and I'm going to share an example with you. This is an example I've written. I make no claims about this being the definitive version of what a Pantoum is or should be, but it's my poem and I own the copyright, which is why we're looking at that poem today. You may look at the poem and think, well, I could do better than that, in which case I'm excited, encouraged that you are encouraged. And this is just for the purposes of the video to help you understand what a Pantoum is structurally, and then how you put that to good use in your own poetic ways is where the fun really starts. So with a click of a button, you should be able to see my screen here. And here we have a poem. I'm just going to explain firstly, before we dig into that this poem is one in a series of Pantoums, and there is a sort of narrative that's thread through the sequence that relates to a familial relationship. This poem in particular is one that references the feelings of the speaker in relation to another family member. And these two family members have been kind of forced by circumstances to assume new roles. They keep their old roles of adult son or daughter and parent or grandparent, but they're now having to wear the new kind of role of caregiver and patient. And there's a lot of guilt here on the speaker's part about that role and maybe how they are lacking in the care that's being given. And that comes out sort of subconsciously through this recurring dream. So let me just start by reading the poem out loud, And you can see that we've got here a number of quatrains, 4-line stanzas on the page. Now this is an open form as well, I should mention that. It's an open form, which means that you can just keep going. You could write an entire book-length Pantoum. There is a specific way to close the poem, which we will come to, but unlike closed forms, this one can keep going. Let me read the poem out loud. In the dream that recurs, there's something in the basement the police have cordoned off, and it's said that I am guilty. There's something in the basement. They dig down through concrete, believing I am guilty. They've uncovered the well and dig down through concrete, wind up the wooden bucket, uncovering the well, and can hear it coming up, winding up the wooden bucket of times I cursed her under breath, and can hear it coming up. All the wishing her dead, of times I cussed her under breath. The police have cordoned off all the wishing her dead in the dream that recurs. Let's just look at how that works. The poem starts, like all poems that we read, with lines we've never heard before. But something happens in the second stanza that is unique to the Pantoum. That is that the third and the fourth line in stanza 1, they're repeated. They become line 1 and line 3 in stanza 2. So in stanza 2 we get these repeated lines, but we also get 2 new lines, and those are lines 2 and 4. And I'm just highlighting them here so you can see on the page how this works. So we start a new stanza, and again we now have from the previous stanza lines 2 and 4 from the previous stanza become lines 1 and lines 3 in stanza 3, and yet again we get 2 new lines, and those again. So every successive stanza is going to include 2 lines from the previous stanza and 2 new lines, and then when we get to the next stanza, again that pattern will repeat. Something interesting happens when we get to the very last stanza. If I scroll down, I've got, I think, what I believe might be more helpful here, a kind of color coding of the whole sort of structure. So again, you can see lines 1 and 3 and lines 2 and 4 I've highlighted in different colors. Now, remember, it's lines 2 and 4 that will become lines 1 and 3 in the new stanza. And again, in stanza 2, lines 2 and 4 that become lines 1 and 3 in the next stanza, and it goes on. Now, when we get to the very end of the poem, the only 2 lines not yet to have been repeated will be lines 1 and 3 from the very first stanza. Now they come into play, but rather in the order that we've been following. So, in other words, rather than lines 1 and 3 becoming lines 2 and 4, it's lines 3 and 1. We just invert the order so that the poem can end on exactly the same line that it starts with. And there we are, you can see at the end there, I'm highlighting how that last line is also the first line. So the first line is the last line. They make bookends to the poem. And now let's move on to a poetry prompt, because you're going to have a go at this yourself. And yes, it is an open form, but I would suggest to begin with, maybe just focus on 4 stanzas, and but maybe not. Maybe you just keep going. Maybe you feel that the poem that you're writing needs longer on the page to express itself, in which case just keep going. But a minimum of 4 stanzas is a good place to start. And I want you to use the idea of a recurring dream, and I want you to use your own dreams as a way into this poetry prompt. Now, of course, as D.H. Lawrence said, trust the tale, not the teller, or in our context, trust the poem, not the poet. Your remembered dream doesn't have to be one that was recurring. You may never have really had a recurring dream, but you're going to take something, the essence of some subconscious kind of bubbling away from a dream, and put that into the poem. So I hope you've enjoyed the video and that you'll experiment with this form, and I'll be back, of course, soon with more poetry content. And in the meantime, as I say at the end of all these videos, please do click on the subscribe button if you haven't, and do click on the like button. It really helps to grow the channel. And good luck with your Pantoum writing, and I'll be back soon. Thanks for watching.